At the family court case, my ex-wife's sister said, "He just wants money, not the kids." Her mom nodded. "He's using them." I stayed quiet until my 8-year-old walked to the stand and said, "Dad told me never to say this, but you need to hear it." Even the judge started crying. Look, I've been called a lot of things in my 37 years on this planet. Boring? Sure, I own that one. I once spent 2 hours organizing my toolbox by size and function, and honestly, it was therapeutic as hell. Predictable? Guilty as charged. I eat the same turkey sandwich for lunch every Tuesday and have zero shame about it. But a gold digger? That was new territory, and let me tell you, it hit different when you're a guy who legitimately forgot his debit card at a gas station 3 times in 1 month. Yet there I was, standing in courtroom 4B of the Sullivan County Family Court, a place that smelled like someone had brewed coffee in 1987 and just kept reheating it ever since, mixed with the delightful aroma of old carpet that had absorbed decades of broken dreams and custody battles. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and I swear the wooden benches were specifically designed to make your ass go numb within 15 minutes, probably to encourage people to settle their differences faster. My ex-wife Harper sat across the aisle with her new boyfriend Theo, who looked like he'd just stepped out of a J.Crew catalog. All perfectly tousled hair and a watch that probably cost more than my car. Her lawyer, this slick guy named Mr. Haynes who wore cufflinks that caught the light every time he gestured dramatically, kept shooting me looks like I'd personally kicked his dog. But the real show? That was Harper's family. Specifically, her sister Olivia and her mother Judith, who'd positioned themselves in the front row like they were settling in for Broadway's hottest new production, Let's Destroy Mason's Life, the musical. Olivia stood up during a break in the proceedings, and I kid you not, she waved her designer handbag, some Prada thing that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, like it was a moral compass pointing true north toward my apparent evil. The bag swooshed through the air as she gestured, and I watched it catch the light, all buttery leather and gold hardware, while she declared to anyone within earshot, "He just wants the money, not the kids." She said it with such conviction, such absolute certainty, that for a second I almost believed her myself. Almost. Then I remembered I was the idiot who'd been coaching Leo's Little League team for free every Saturday while she was getting Botox and posting Instagram stories about self-care Sundays. Judith, Harper's mother, a woman who wore so much perfume that I was pretty sure the EPA should have been notified, sat beside her daughter nodding like one of those bobblehead dolls people stick on their dashboards. Her pearl necklace, fake, by the way, but don't tell her I know, bounced with each emphatic nod, and she leaned over to whisper to the woman sitting next to her, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear, "He's using them. Those poor babies." She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief that I'm 90% sure was just for show because I didn't see a single actual tear. The woman she was talking to, some friend she dragged along for moral support or entertainment or whatever, gasped right on cue like they'd rehearsed this whole performance. I stood there, my cheap suit, the one I'd bought on sale at Kohl's 3 years ago for a wedding, feeling tighter around my shoulders, my tie slightly crooked because I'd tied it in the car and apparently still hadn't mastered that skill after nearly 4 decades of life. My lawyer, Ms. Patel, a sharp woman in her 40s who'd taken my case partly because she believed me and partly because, as she'd said during our first meeting, "I'm so tired of seeing good dads get screwed," touched my elbow gently. "Don't react," she whispered. "Let them hang themselves with their own rope." So I said nothing. I just stood there like a mannequin in a discount store window, expressionless, while my character got assassinated in real time. I'd learned early on in this nightmare that in court, silence speaks louder than sarcasm. And believe me, my sarcasm was fully loaded, locked, and ready to fire. I had about 17 different comebacks locked and loaded in my brain, ranging from mildly snarky to absolutely scorched earth, but I kept my mouth shut. Instead, I mentally composed responses I'd never say out loud, like how Olivia's life coaching business was basically her posting motivational quotes she found on Pinterest while her boyfriend paid for everything, or how Judith had conveniently forgotten that she'd called me the best son-in-law ever, right up until the divorce papers were filed. The judge, a man named Everly who looked like he'd stopped feeling emotions sometime around the fall of the Berlin Wall, sat behind his bench with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact same drama play out approximately 10,000 times and was thoroughly over it. He had that particular shade of gray hair that comes from years of listening to people lie, half-lie, and occasionally tell something resembling the truth. His glasses sat on the end of his nose, and he kept glancing at the clock like he was calculating how many more hours until retirement. Then it happened. My 8-year-old son Leo, wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him. We'd bought it at Target the week before, and I'd had to roll up the sleeves twice, stood up from where he'd been sitting quietly next to Ms. Patel. He was small for his age, all skinny arms and knobby knees, with my dark hair that stuck up in the back no matter how much I tried to smooth it down that morning. His Spider-Man socks peeked out from under his dress pants because that had been the compromise. He'd wear the suit if he could wear his favorite socks. The courtroom went quiet, that special kind of silence that happens when something unexpected occurs. Even the court reporters stopped typing. Leo looked directly at Judge Everly with those serious brown eyes, and in a voice that was way steadier than mine had been all day, said, "Your Honor, Dad told me never to say this, but you need to hear it." That's when Judge Everly did something I hadn't seen him do once during the entire proceeding. He took off his glasses slowly, like he'd just been hit with something heavy, and wiped his eyes. Actually wiped them. The man who looked like he'd last cried during the Reagan administration suddenly had moisture in his eyes because of my kid. And me? I just sat there, my heart doing something between a somersault and a complete system shutdown, thinking, well, there goes my shot at being the boring parent. Because boring parents don't end up in courtrooms with their 8-year-olds making judges cry. Boring parents have boring custody arrangements that get settled over email and awkward coffee shop meetings. But before I get to that moment, the moment that would end up changing everything, let me rewind this disaster. Because none of this started in a courtroom that smelled like defeat and old coffee. It started way before that, in my living room with burnt lasagna smoke setting off the fire alarm, and a woman named Harper who'd somehow transformed from my wife into a stranger I didn't recognize anymore. 2 years before I became the star of Courtroom Drama, Dad Edition, my life was so normal it could have been sponsored by Cheerios. Harper and I had this whole thing down. The kind of life that looks fantastic in those family photo shoots where everyone's wearing matching outfits in a field of wildflowers, pretending they didn't just spend 20 minutes arguing about who forgot to charge the camera battery. We had the house in the suburbs with the white fence that needed repainting every 3 years like clockwork, the golden retriever named Biscuit who was dumber than a bag of hammers but loyal as hell, and 2 kids who were, at least back then, happy, healthy, and blissfully unaware that their parents' marriage had an expiration date stamped on it. From the outside, we were peak American dream material. Harper would post these carefully curated Instagram photos of our family dinners with captions like, "Grateful for these moments," and "Blessed beyond measure," complete with the exact right number of hashtags to maximize engagement, but not look desperate. She had this knack for making our regular Tuesday night spaghetti look like something out of Bon Appetit magazine. Probably because she'd spend 15 minutes arranging it on the plates and adjusting the lighting while the food got cold. Leo and Ivy would be forced to smile on command, and I'd be there in the background, usually making some stupid face because I physically cannot take a serious photo to save my life. My buddy from work, Dave, used to joke that we looked like a stock photo family, the kind you'd see in picture frames at Target before you put your own photos in. "You're so aggressively normal it's almost suspicious," he'd say, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I worked as a mechanical engineer at Hendrix Industrial Solutions, a mid-sized company that made components for manufacturing equipment. Riveting stuff, I know, but I genuinely loved it. There's something satisfying about solving problems with actual numbers in physics, where 2 + 2 always equals 4 and nobody's trying to gaslight you about basic math. I'd leave the house at 7:30 every morning, stop at the same coffee shop for the same medium roast with cream and 1 sugar, arrive at my desk by 8:15, and spend my day designing conveyor systems and troubleshooting mechanical failures. My coworkers were solid people. Dave, who brought in donuts every Friday and told dad jokes even worse than mine. Patricia, who'd been there for 20 years and knew where every single file was located. And my boss Martin, who pretty much left me alone as long as projects got done on time. I lived for the simple stuff that probably sounds boring to most people, but felt like actual life to me. Dad jokes that made my kids groan so hard I thought their eyes might roll out of their heads. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Leo would slap his forehead and Ivy would giggle despite herself. And that reaction was better than any applause I'd ever gotten. Friday movie nights where we'd make a massive bowl of popcorn. The real stuff, not that microwave garbage, and the kids would fight over who got to pick the movie until we instituted a democratic rotation system that Leo tracked on a spreadsheet because apparently he inherited my organizational tendencies. Teaching Leo how to ride his bike without training wheels in the driveway, running behind him with my hand on the seat, until that magical moment when I let go and he just kept going, wobbly and terrified and absolutely thriving. Reading Ivy bedtime stories in funny voices until she'd fall asleep with her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. Harper was different back then, or maybe I just didn't notice the signs that she was already becoming someone else. She'd always been ambitious. That was one of the things I'd loved about her when we met in college, the way she attacked life like it owed her money and she was there to collect. She was sharp as hell, quick-witted, could read people like books and knew exactly what to say to make them like her. When we got married, she was working in marketing for a cosmetics company, and she was good at it, climbing the ladder faster than most people found the first rung. But she always talked about doing her own thing, building something that was completely hers, and I supported that. Of course I did. I'm not some 1950s caveman who thinks women should stay home and bake pies all day. The online fashion business started as a side hustle. She'd curate outfits and post them on Instagram, link to where people could buy the pieces, make a commission on sales. It was harmless, maybe even fun. She'd ask my opinion on outfits, and I'd say encouraging things like, "That looks great, honey," while having absolutely no idea if the shoes matched the bag or whatever. But then it exploded. Like, genuinely took off in a way neither of us expected. Suddenly, she had 50,000 followers, then 100,000. Then brands were reaching out to her for partnerships and sponsorships. She was making real money. More than my engineering salary some months, which should have been celebrated, but somehow felt weird in a way I couldn't quite articulate without sounding like an insecure jackass. That's when things started shifting, so gradually I didn't notice it was happening until I was already standing in the wreckage. Harper had meetings every night, networking events, influencer dinners, brand collaborations that apparently required her to be out until 10 or 11 p.m. She'd come home smelling like expensive wine and someone else's cologne, her eyes bright with excitement that had nothing to do with me or the kids. I became background decor, like that expensive vase you buy because it looks nice but never actually use. I was the plant that waters itself, functional, present, but ultimately forgettable. I didn't complain much, because that's what guys do, right? We just keep our heads down and handle our business until everything's actively on fire, and even then we'll probably try to convince ourselves it's fine. Just a little warm in here, no big deal. I'd make dinner for the kids while Harper was at another essential meeting. Help with homework, do bath time, read stories, tuck them in, and then sit on the couch alone watching Netflix shows I didn't care about while texting Harper, "When will you be home?" and getting responses like, "Soon." That meant absolutely nothing. The cracks, when they appeared, weren't the loud, dramatic kind you see in movies where someone throws a lamp and storms out. They were quiet, insidious, the kind that grow in the foundation of a house until one day you realize the whole structure's compromised. Dinners eaten alone while her food got cold on the counter. Texts left unread for hours, then answered with single-word responses. Her laughter sounding different, brighter and freer when she was on the phone with someone else, forced and obligatory when it was directed at me. The way she'd started sleeping on her side of the bed with a wall of pillows between us, like she was building a Berlin Wall out of memory foam. And then came the classic line, delivered one random Wednesday morning while I was making coffee, and she was checking her phone. "You've changed, Mason." She said it like it was a profound observation, like she'd discovered some fundamental truth about my character. I just stared at her, coffee pot in hand, trying to figure out what alternate dimension I'd stumbled into where staying faithful, employed, and home by 7 p.m. made me the villain. Because apparently that's exactly what it made me. Boring, predictable, the human equivalent of beige paint. Meanwhile, she was out there living her best life, with people who said things like, "Manifest your dreams," without a trace of irony. And somehow I was the problem. It happened on a Tuesday, because apparently the universe has a sick sense of humor and saves all its worst news for Tuesdays. Not Monday when you're already expecting the week to kick you in the teeth, and not Friday when at least you've got the weekend to process your emotional carnage with beer and bad decisions. No, it's always Tuesday, the day when you've just recovered from Monday's bullshit and foolishly think the week might actually be okay. I was standing in our kitchen making breakfast, scrambling eggs the way Ivy liked them with just a tiny bit of cheese mixed in, when Harper walked in wearing what I'd come to recognize as her serious conversation face. You know the look, lips pressed together in that thin line, eyes doing that thing where they're looking at you, but also somehow through you, shoulders squared like she's about to deliver a presentation to the board. My stomach dropped immediately because nobody makes that face unless they're about to ruin your whole day, possibly your whole year. Mason, I think we need space, she said, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, still in her silk pajamas that cost more than my entire week's worth of outfits. She said it so casually, like she was suggesting we try a new restaurant or rearrange the living room furniture, not detonate our entire marriage and family structure. Now, I'm not a genius, but I've watched enough TV and lived through enough human experiences to know that I need space is never actually about space. Nobody's standing there thinking, gosh, I wish I had more physical distance from my spouse, like maybe we should measure the square footage between us more carefully. No, I need space is code, and the translation is pretty simple. There's someone else, but I'm going to frame this like it's about personal growth and finding myself, so you can't call me out for being a cheating asshole without looking like the bad guy. Space, I repeated, turning off the stove burner because suddenly eggs seemed completely irrelevant. Like, we should go to couples therapy space, or like, I should start looking for a lawyer space? She had the decency to wince, at least. I think we've grown apart. I'm not the same person I was when we got married. You're not the same person. We want different things now. I wanted to laugh, but it came out more like a choke. I want the same things I've always wanted. A family, a home, someone to share my life with. What exactly have I changed about that? She didn't answer directly, just looked away and said, I've already talked to a lawyer. I think it's best if we do this amicably. For the kids. For the kids. That phrase would get thrown around so much over the next few months that it lost all meaning, becoming this magical justification for every shitty decision anyone made. It's like saying no offense before insulting someone. It doesn't actually make the thing any less offensive. His name was Theo, which I found out approximately 48 hours later when my buddy Dave did some Instagram stalking that would have made the FBI proud. Theo was Harper's new business partner, a development that apparently happened while I was busy being a boring husband and father. He was tall, because of course he was, with that artfully messy hair that probably required 30 minutes and 16 products to achieve that I just woke up like this look. He wore turtlenecks in the summer, actual turtlenecks, like he was Steve Jobs' less successful cousin trying to manifest tech billionaire energy. And he said things like synergy and disruptive innovation and let's take this offline, without a single trace of irony or self-awareness. Dave showed me Theo's Instagram profile at work one day, sliding his phone across the desk during lunch break with the energy of someone delivering crucial intelligence. Dude, I'm sorry, but you need to see this. There was Theo, posing in front of a BMW, leased, I'd bet my left kidney, with a caption about grinding and hustling and some Gary Vaynerchuk quote about success. There was Theo at some influencer event, surrounded by people taking selfies. And there, buried 3 weeks back in his feed, was a photo of him and Harper at a business dinner, her laughing at something he said, her hand on his arm, both of them looking way too comfortable for people who were supposedly just professional colleagues. What a tool, Dave said, taking a massive bite of his sandwich. I mean, seriously, who actually dresses like that? Is he trying to get cast in a cologne commercial? Within weeks, Harper moved out. She got an apartment downtown, a trendy loft in one of those converted warehouse buildings where everything's exposed brick and industrial lighting. The kind of place that costs $3,000 a month and has absolutely zero storage space. She took our 2 kids, Leo, who was 8 and old enough to understand that something was fundamentally wrong even if he couldn't articulate it, and Ivy, who was 5 and kept asking when mommy was coming home like this was just an extended sleepover, half the week. We did the standard divorced parent shuffle. She got them Monday and Tuesday. I got them Wednesday and Thursday, and we alternated weekends like we were trading baseball cards. The kids liked Theo, which felt like someone was slowly pushing a knife between my ribs every time I heard about it. Of course they liked him. He bought them drones and gaming systems and let them have ice cream for breakfast, positioning himself as the fun adult while I was stuck being the responsible parent who said things like, "Finish your vegetables," and "No, you can't watch YouTube until 3 in the morning." Ivy came home one Wednesday chattering about how Theo let her eat Lucky Charms and watch cartoons before school, while I'm standing there with my bowl of oatmeal and sliced bananas like some kind of health food terrorist. Leo was quieter about it, more observant. He'd mention things casually, testing the waters to see how I'd react. "Theo has a really big TV," he'd say, watching my face. He showed me his drone collection. He said maybe he'd teach me to fly one. And I'd smile and say, "That's nice, buddy," while internally screaming, because what was I supposed to do? Trash talk the guy to my 8-year-old? Turn my son into a messenger of my bitterness? Meanwhile, I was teaching them math and manners, two things that are apparently way less exciting than dessert at 7 a.m. and unlimited screen time. I helped Leo with his multiplication tables and read Ivy stories with proper bedtimes. I made them brush their teeth and eat actual meals with protein and vegetables. I took them to the pediatrician and the dentist and made sure their homework got done. You know, boring parent stuff. Responsible parent stuff. The stuff that doesn't make you the cool guy, but actually raises functional human beings who won't end up living in your basement at 35. I stayed civil through all of it. When Harper dropped the kids off, I'd ask polite questions about her week and make small talk about logistics. When she picked them up, I'd have their bags packed with everything they needed, homework completed, permission slips signed. I didn't badmouth her to the kids or pump them for information about what was happening at her place. Because no matter how bad things got, no matter how much I wanted to scream or throw something or make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling, I wasn't going to turn my children into weapons. They didn't ask for this. They didn't deserve to be collateral damage in their parents' failed marriage. But Harper's family? Oh, they had no such reservations. They were loading cannons, preparing for war, and I was about to become their primary target. Let me tell you about Judith Montgomery Reynolds. Yes, she hyphenated her maiden name because apparently one last name wasn't enough to contain her sense of self-importance. Harper's mother was the kind of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and perfume so strong it could knock out small animals from 15 feet away. I'm talking about the kind of fragrance assault that violates the Geneva Convention, the stuff that lingers in elevators for 20 minutes after she's left and makes people wonder if they're having a stroke. She'd sweep into a room like she was making a grand entrance at the Met Gala, and everyone was supposed to stop what they were doing and acknowledge her presence. From day one of dating Harper, Judith had treated me like a charity case she'd once regretted funding. I wasn't good enough for her daughter, not rich enough, not connected enough, not prestigious enough. Never mind that I had a stable career, paid my bills on time, and treated her daughter with respect. No, I was just some middle-class engineer with a state school degree and a used Honda Civic, which apparently made me the human equivalent of clearance rack merchandise at TJ Maxx. Her favorite hobby, aside from drinking Chardonnay at 11 in the morning and pretending it was sophisticated, was reminding anyone within earshot that Harper could have done better. I remember our wedding reception, where Judith got just drunk enough to be honest, but sober enough to be insulting. She cornered me by the dessert table. I was trying to sneak a second piece of cake because it was my wedding and I'd earned it, and put her hand on my arm with this smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know, Mason," she slurred slightly, her wine breath hitting me like a wall. I never thought Harper would settle. But here we are. Then she patted my cheek like I was a golden retriever who'd learned a new trick and wandered off to tell her friends about the quaint wedding venue, which was actually a beautiful garden space that Harper and I had specifically chosen because we loved it, not because we couldn't afford the country club Judith had pushed for. Harper used to defend me back then, at least a little. She'd roll her eyes at her mother's comments and say, "Mom, stop," with just enough annoyance to make me feel supported. But after the separation, that defense system shut down completely. Suddenly Judith's opinions carried weight again, and I went from not good enough to actively malicious gold digger in her narrative. Then there was Olivia, Harper's younger sister by 3 years, who was somehow even more insufferable than her mother, which I didn't think was scientifically possible. Olivia was a self-proclaimed life coach, a title that apparently required zero credentials, certification, or actual life experience. Just an Instagram account and the audacity to charge people $200 an hour for advice she'd found on Pinterest. Her entire career, and I use that term loosely, consisted of posting motivational quotes over sunset photos and hosting workshops at expensive hotels about manifesting abundance and aligning with your higher purpose. The kicker? Her whole lifestyle was sponsored by her boyfriend Marcus's credit card. Marcus was some finance bro who worked 80-hour weeks so Olivia could drink $12 green juices and attend yoga retreats in Bali while posting about creating your own reality. She lived in a condo Marcus paid for, drove a Mercedes Marcus leased, and wore designer clothes Marcus's American Express card purchased, all while lecturing other people about financial independence and manifestation. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but self-awareness had never been Olivia's strong suit. She once cornered me at a family barbecue. This was about 6 months before the divorce, when things were already rocky but we were still pretending everything was fine, and said, with complete sincerity, "Mason, I think the problem is you just don't manifest abundance. You're operating from a scarcity mindset." I was literally grilling burgers for 15 people at the time, trying to make sure nobody got food poisoning, while she stood there in an outfit that cost more than my mortgage payment, holding a glass of organic wine and explaining the universe to me. "You're right," I said, flipping a burger with perhaps more force than necessary. "I should really focus on manifesting abundance instead of working 40 hours a week at an actual job. Maybe if I post enough inspirational quotes, my bills will pay themselves." She didn't catch the sarcasm. She never did. Instead, she nodded enthusiastically and said, "Exactly. You're starting to get it. I can send you some resources about rewiring your abundance programming." "Please don't," I said, but she was already pulling out her phone to text me links to her YouTube channel where she talked about quantum leaping into your dream reality, or whatever nonsense she was peddling that month. After Harper and I separated, both Judith and Olivia kicked into high gear, and their new mission became crystal clear: destroy Mason Reed's reputation by any means necessary. They started a whisper campaign that would have made Cold War propagandists proud. At Harper's friend's birthday party, which I only heard about through my buddy Dave, whose wife was there, Judith held court in the corner, telling anyone who'd listen that I was only fighting for custody to get more child support. She said it with such conviction, clutching her wine glass like a prop in a one-woman show, that people actually believed her. Me, the guy who'd once worn duct-taped shoes for 3 months because I was saving money for Ivy's art classes at the community center. The guy who drove a 10-year-old car with a broken air conditioner because I'd rather put money into the kids' college funds than lease some overpriced status symbol. The guy who'd literally calculated our family budget down to the last dollar every month, making sure we were saving for the kids' future while Harper was dropping $300 on a single blouse that she wore once for Instagram photos. That guy was apparently a gold digger. The math didn't even make sense. Child support in our state was calculated based on income and custody time. If I had primary custody, I'd be paying for most of their expenses directly, meaning I'd actually get less money, not more. But facts didn't matter in Judith's narrative. She'd decided I was the villain, and she was going to make sure everyone knew it. Olivia, not to be outdone by her mother, took to social media with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. She started posting vague, inspirational quotes that were clearly about me. Sometimes the people who seem the nicest are hiding the darkest intentions. And protect your sister from men who only see dollar signs. She never mentioned me by name. She wasn't that stupid, but anyone who knew our situation could connect the dots. Her followers, a collection of other life coaches and people who believe crystals could cure diseases, ate it up, leaving comments like, "Stay strong, queen," and "Your sister deserves better." I watched this character assassination happen in real time, feeling like I was trapped in some twisted reality show where I didn't get to defend myself. My buddy Dave, bless him, would send me screenshots with messages like, "Dude, are you seeing this shit?" Yes, Dave, I was seeing it. I was seeing my former family turn me into a monster for daring to want to be involved in my own children's lives. But nothing I said mattered, because they had something I didn't: money, lawyers with fancy offices in downtown high-rises, and matching smug faces that came from years of looking down on people they considered beneath them. I had the truth, a second-hand suit from Men's Warehouse that I'd bought for a funeral 3 years ago, and an 8-year-old son who kept asking me questions I didn't know how to answer. "Dad, why do grown-ups lie so much?" Leo asked me one night while I was tucking him in, his serious brown eyes looking up at me in the dim light of his Spider-Man nightlight. I sat on the edge of his bed, trying to figure out how to explain that sometimes people lie because the truth doesn't fit the story they want to tell. That his grandmother and aunt weren't evil, just selfish and convinced of their own righteousness. That the world was more complicated than good guys and bad guys, even though it shouldn't be. Sometimes people believe their own stories so much that they stop seeing what's real. I finally said, smoothing his hair back. "But you know what's real? I love you. Your mom loves you. And we're going to figure this out." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He was 8, but he wasn't stupid. He could feel the tension, hear the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, sense that the adults in his life were gearing up for war. And he was right. Because Judith and Olivia weren't done. They were just getting started. The day the custody hearing officially started, I woke up at 4 in the morning with my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. Except I was lying perfectly still in bed staring at the ceiling fan, making its slow rotation above me. My stomach felt like I'd swallowed a bag of rocks, and I'd already been to the bathroom twice with stress-induced digestive issues that I'll spare you the details of, except to say that my body was absolutely not handling this well. I'd laid out my suit the night before, the same Men's Warehouse special that had seen better days, and spent 20 minutes that morning trying to get my tie straight before giving up and accepting that I'd look slightly disheveled no matter what I did. Ms. Patel met me outside the courthouse at 8:30 sharp, carrying a leather briefcase that looked way more professional than my canvas messenger bag that I'd bought at Target on clearance. She was wearing a sharp navy suit and had her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun that screamed, "I'm here to win," and I immediately felt better having her on my side. "Remember," she said, gripping my shoulder, "they're going to try to make you react. Don't give them the satisfaction. We have truth on our side, and truth is patient." I nodded, even though patience had never been my strong suit, and honestly, truth felt like a pretty weak weapon when the other side had money and influence and a willingness to lie with the confidence of people who'd never faced consequences for anything in their entire privileged lives. Walking into that courtroom felt like voluntarily entering a gladiator arena. Except instead of lions, I was facing lawyers and ex-in-laws who wanted to watch me bleed. The room itself was depressing in that specific way that government buildings always are. Industrial carpet in some indeterminate brownish color, fluorescent lights that made everyone look vaguely ill, and wooden benches that had been sat on by thousands of people going through the worst days of their lives. The air conditioning was cranked up too high, making the place feel like a meat locker, and I could hear it rattling through the vents with this rhythmic clunking sound that was probably a maintenance issue nobody had bothered to fix in 15 years. Harper sat on the opposite side of the aisle with Theo beside her, and I'll give her credit, she looked nervous. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and she kept glancing at her mother and sister like she was seeking approval or maybe reassurance that what she was doing was right. Theo, on the other hand, looked like he was at a business meeting he was slightly bored by, checking his phone every few minutes until Harper elbowed him and whispered something sharp that made him put it away. He was wearing some designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, with those expensive Italian shoes that somehow managed to look both formal and casual at the same time, and I hated him with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Then there was Mr. Haynes, Harper's lawyer, and this guy was something else. He was maybe 50, with silver hair that was definitely professionally styled. You could tell by the way it swooped back from his forehead in a way that defied both gravity and aging. He wore a suit that fit so perfectly it had to be custom-tailored, probably from some boutique downtown where they served you champagne while measuring your inseam. His cufflinks caught the light every time he moved, these flashy gold things that probably cost more than my car payment. And he had this way of moving around the courtroom like he owned it, like he'd won 1,000 cases in this exact room and fully expected to win this one too. When Judge Everly called the court to order, Mr. Haynes stood up with this practiced ease, buttoning his jacket with one smooth motion like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. He started his opening statement, and I swear to God, it was like watching someone audition for a legal drama on TV. He paced back and forth, gesturing dramatically, his voice rising and falling with theatrical emphasis. "Your Honor," he said, pausing for effect, "this case is about protecting two innocent children from a father who has shown himself to be emotionally unstable and financially motivated." Emotionally unstable. Those words hung in the air like a bad smell, and I felt Ms. Patel's hand on my arm, a gentle reminder not to react, not to give them anything they could use against me. But inside, I was screaming, because how dare this man who'd never met me, who knew nothing about me except what he'd been fed by people with an agenda, stand there and call me unstable? I'd been the stable one. I'd been the one showing up every single day, making breakfast and packing lunches and helping with homework and reading bedtime stories. I'd been the reliable parent while Harper was out finding herself, with Theo the turtleneck enthusiast. Then Olivia took the stand, and I realized we'd entered the performance art portion of the hearing. She walked up to the witness stand like she was about to accept an Oscar, wearing some expensive outfit that probably came from a boutique where they don't put price tags on anything, because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, which was rich coming from someone whose entire career was built on selling fantasies to desperate people, and settled into her chair with this expression of concerned sorrow that was so fake I wanted to laugh. Mr. Haynes approached her with the gentleness of someone handling a trauma victim. "Ms. Reynolds, can you tell the court about your observations of Mr. Reed during the marriage?" Olivia sighed, like the weight of this testimony was almost too much to bear. "Mason was always difficult," she began, and I nearly choked on my own spit. He couldn't handle Harper's success. When her business started taking off, he became withdrawn, resentful. He'd make these passive-aggressive comments about her working late, about her new opportunities. It was clear he felt threatened by a strong, successful woman. This was my character now, apparently. Not the guy who'd encouraged Harper to start her business in the first place, who'd taken on more household duties so she could pursue her dreams, who'd celebrated every milestone and promotion. No, I was the insecure husband who couldn't handle his wife's success. Never mind that I'd literally never said one negative word about her career. I'd questioned her absence, sure, and the fact that her business meetings seemed to involve a lot of alone time with Theo, but her actual success? I'd been proud of her, at least until I realized it came with a side of infidelity. And after the separation, Mr. Haynes prompted, like he was directing a play. He became obsessed with getting custody. Olivia continued, warming to her role. Not because he cares about the children's well-being, but because he knows Harper has money now. He sees those kids as a paycheck, a way to maintain his lifestyle now that Harper's moved on. It's honestly heartbreaking to watch him use Leo and Ivy as pawns in his financial scheme. I watched Judge Everly's face during this testimony, trying to gauge his reaction, but the man was unreadable. He sat there taking notes, his expression neutral, giving away nothing. Meanwhile, Olivia kept going, painting me as some kind of master manipulator who'd planned this entire custody battle as a long con to extract money from my successful ex-wife. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. I was the one who'd been working the same steady job for 10 years, paying the mortgage, covering the bills, while Harper spent money like it was monopoly currency and Olivia mooched off her boyfriend's credit cards. But sure, I was the gold digger. When she finally finished her testimony, looking satisfied with her performance, Mr. Haynes thanked her like she'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address. "No further questions, Your Honor." Ms. Patel stood for cross-examination, and I could see Olivia's confidence waver slightly. "Ms. Reynolds, you mentioned Mr. Reed was withdrawn during the marriage. Did you ever consider that working long hours and caring for two young children while his wife was frequently absent might cause legitimate exhaustion?" Well, I suppose. And these passive-aggressive comments you mentioned, can you provide specific examples with dates and contexts? Olivia floundered, unable to produce anything concrete because, of course, she'd been making it all up. But the damage was done. The narrative was established. Then came Judith, and if Olivia's performance was theater, Judith's was grand opera. She approached the stand clutching her handkerchief like it was a religious artifact, dabbing at her eyes before she'd even been asked a question. She wore a tasteful black dress, because apparently we were attending a funeral, specifically the funeral of my reputation, and those fake pearls that she thought nobody knew were fake. "Mrs. Montgomery Reynolds, Mr. Haynes said gently. Can you tell us what you've observed? Judith's voice trembled with practiced emotion. That man, she said, pointing at me like I was a criminal in a lineup, is using my grandchildren. My sweet, innocent grandchildren. He doesn't want them. He wants Harper's money. He wants to punish her for being successful, for finding happiness with someone who appreciates her. A single tear, actual moisture this time, though I suspected it was more rage than sadness, rolled down her cheek. Those poor babies deserve better than a father who sees them as dollar signs. Even Judge Everly sighed at that point, a long exhale that suggested he'd seen this exact performance approximately 10,000 times before and was thoroughly tired of it. He rubbed his temples like he was fighting off a headache, and honestly, same. Ms. Patel leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. Truth always wins." I muttered back, "Tell that to my parking tickets." Because even now, sitting in the worst moment of my life, my brain defaulted to inappropriate humor as a coping mechanism. But I stayed calm. I sat there, hands folded, face neutral, while my character got shredded by people who'd never bothered to know me. And I waited for my turn to speak. When Judge Everly called for a 30-minute recess, I practically sprinted out of that courtroom like someone had yelled fire in a crowded theater. My legs felt shaky, my shirt was sticking to my back with nervous sweat despite the Arctic air conditioning, and I needed to see my kids more than I needed my next breath. Ms. Patel had arranged for them to wait in a small family room down the hall, one of those depressing spaces with educational posters about co-parenting on the walls and a box of donated toys that looked like they'd survived several natural disasters and maybe a plague. I found Leo and Ivy sitting on an old couch that had definitely seen better days, probably back when Reagan was president. The fabric was that industrial-grade stuff they use in doctors' offices, some vague pattern that was supposed to hide stains, but really just looked perpetually dirty. Ivy had somehow found a box of crayons and was currently decorating my tie. The same tie I'd spent 20 minutes that morning trying to get straight, with what appeared to be an army of cats in various colors. She was humming some song from Frozen, completely oblivious to the emotional warfare happening down the hall, and honestly, I envied her innocence so much it hurt. "Hey, Butterfly," I said, sitting down next to her and pulling her onto my lap. That was my nickname for her, had been since she was 2, and became obsessed with butterflies after we'd seen them at the botanical garden. She giggled and showed me her artwork, which had transformed my boring navy tie into something that belonged in a modern art museum. Assuming that museum accepted submissions from 5-year-olds with limited fine motor skills and an excessive fondness for the color purple. "Do you like them, Daddy? This one is Princess Whiskers, and this one is Sir Meowington, and this one is..." "They're perfect, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, and trying not to think about the fact that a judge was currently deciding how much time I'd get to keep doing exactly this. Absolutely perfect. Leo sat on the other end of the couch, and I noticed immediately that something was off. He wasn't playing on the tablet I'd brought for him, wasn't reading one of his books, wasn't doing any of the things an 8-year-old usually does when given 30 minutes of unstructured time. Instead, he was just sitting there staring at the floor with this intensity that reminded me uncomfortably of myself when I was working through a particularly difficult engineering problem. His jaw was set in that stubborn way he'd inherited from me. Harper always said he had my determined face, which she meant as a criticism, but I'd always taken as a compliment. The court-appointed child advocate, a woman named Mrs. Chun who seemed genuinely kind despite working in a system that must slowly destroy your faith in humanity, had stepped out to make a phone call, leaving us alone. I was grateful for that. These moments were becoming precious. Not just seeing my kids, but seeing them without supervision, without someone taking notes about our interactions to submit in a court report. "Dad," Leo said suddenly, still looking at the floor, his voice quiet but firm in that way that made me pay attention. "They're lying about you." My stomach clenched. I tried so hard to keep the kids insulated from the details of this mess, to maintain the illusion that everything would be okay, that adults were handling adult problems, and they didn't need to worry. Clearly, I'd failed spectacularly at that mission, because Leo had apparently been paying way more attention than I'd given him credit for. "I know, buddy," I said carefully, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation without either lying to him or traumatizing him further. but sometimes adults. No, he interrupted, and there was something in his voice that made me stop mid-sentence. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were clear and determined and older than any 8-year-old should be. They're lying. Grandma and Aunt Olivia. They said you don't care about us, that you just want money. But that's not true. You're here every day. You make us breakfast and help with homework and come to my baseball games even when you're tired from work. You're the one who's always there. My throat tightened, and I had to blink hard because crying in front of my kids was not on today's agenda, even though I felt dangerously close to it. Leo, it's complicated. It's not complicated, he said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. That beautiful clarity before life teaches you that everything is gray and nothing is simple. They're lying, and I'm going to tell the judge. I nearly choked on the lukewarm coffee I'd grabbed from the vending machine down the hall, the kind that tastes like it was brewed sometime last week and has been sitting in that pot ever since. You? In there? I gestured vaguely toward the courtroom, trying to keep my voice light even though internal alarm bells were screaming. Buddy, that's not. You don't have to do that. He nodded, his expression unchanging, like he'd already made this decision and nothing I said was going to change his mind. You said honesty wins. You told me that lying never works out, that the truth always matters. So I'm going to win for us. Jesus Christ. My own words, the parenting lessons I'd been drilling into his head since he was old enough to understand sentences, were coming back to bite me in the most terrifying way possible. What was I supposed to say? Actually, son, I was lying about that whole honesty thing. It's complete bullshit. Powerful people lie all the time and get away with it. That seemed like poor parenting, even by my current standards. Before I could formulate any response that made sense, Ms. Patel appeared in the doorway. She must have been standing there for at least part of the conversation, because she had this look on her face, not quite a smile, but something thoughtful and calculating, like she was running through legal scenarios in her head at lightning speed. Actually, Mason, she said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her, lowering her voice so Ivy wouldn't pay attention. It might help. I stared at her like she'd just suggested we rob a bank to pay for legal fees. I'm sorry, what? You want my 8-year-old son to testify? Are you out of your mind? I kept my voice low so I wouldn't alarm Ivy, who was still happily coloring cats and humming. Bless her oblivious heart. Ms. Patel sat down in one of the plastic chairs across from us, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. I know how it sounds. But Mason, listen, judges hear from lawyers all day. They hear allegations and counter-allegations, and everyone has an agenda. But a child? Especially one who's articulate and honest? That's powerful. Judge Everly has a reputation for taking children's testimony seriously, especially when they're old enough to understand what's happening. He's 8, I said, like she'd somehow forgotten this crucial detail. 8 years old. I'm not putting him through that. Do you know what Harper's lawyer will do to him up there? He'll tear him apart. Actually, no, Ms. Patel said. There are strict rules about cross-examining children, especially in family court. Haynes can ask clarifying questions, but he can't be aggressive or hostile. Judge Everly won't allow it. I laughed, but it came out bitter and harsh. Right, let's just throw my 8-year-old into the lion's den. That's a perfect parenting move. Father of the Year material right there. Remember that time Dad let you testify in court? Good times, huh? No trauma whatsoever. Leo was watching this exchange like a tennis match, his head moving back and forth between me and Ms. Patel. Then he spoke, and his voice was steady in a way that made my chest hurt. Dad, I want to. They need to know you're a good dad. Someone has to tell them the truth. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something that simultaneously filled me with pride and broke my heart into approximately 1,000,000 pieces. He wasn't scared. He wasn't being manipulated or coached. He was just a kid who knew what was right and was willing to stand up for it, even when the adults around him were too afraid or too cynical or too beaten down by the system to do the same. But God, the thought of him up there, in front of all those people, with Harper and her family watching, having to talk about our family's dysfunction like it was evidence in a trial, because that's exactly what it was, made me feel physically ill. What kind of father puts his kid in that position? What kind of person uses their child as a witness in their own defense? Leo? I started, but Ms. Patel interrupted me gently. Mason, this is Leo's choice. We're not forcing him. But if he wants to speak, if he has something to say, then legally he has that right. Children have voices in custody proceedings. It's actually one of the few protections the system has built in. I looked at Leo's face again, calm, steady, braver than I'd ever been in my entire life. His shoulders were squared, his chin up, and he looked so much like Harper in that moment that it physically hurt. But he had my stubbornness, my refusal to back down when I knew I was right, even when it would have been easier to just shut up and take it. "You're sure about this?" I asked him, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it together. "Because, buddy, you don't have to. This is grown-up stuff. You can just be a kid." "I'm sure," Leo said, and he reached over and took my hand, his small fingers wrapping around mine. "Someone has to tell them the truth, Dad. And you taught me that's what matters." Miss Patel stood up, smoothing down her suit. "I'll talk to Judge Everly during the recess. If he approves, and I think he will, Leo can take the stand after we reconvene." After she left, I sat there with both my kids, Ivy still decorating my tie with increasingly elaborate cat portraits, and Leo sitting quietly beside me like he hadn't just volunteered to do the scariest thing an 8-year-old could do. And I realized that somewhere along the way, while I'd been busy trying to protect him from this mess, he'd been watching and learning and becoming exactly the kind of person I'd always hoped he'd be. I just wished he didn't have to prove it in a courtroom. When we walked back into that courtroom after the recess, I felt like I was escorting my kid to the gallows, except the gallows were made of polished wood and legal precedent, and instead of a noose there was just a witness stand with a microphone that looked way too big for an 8-year-old. My hand was sweating where Leo held it, or maybe his hand was sweating, or maybe we were both just leaking anxiety through our palms like some kind of stress-induced osmosis. Every step toward our seats felt weighted, like I was walking through concrete instead of that god-awful industrial carpet that had probably absorbed the tears of 1,000 broken families before ours. Judge Everly had apparently approved Leo's testimony during the recess, which Ms. Patel relayed to me with a reassuring squeeze on my shoulder that did absolutely nothing to calm my nerves. Harper looked confused when we entered, her eyebrows pulled together in that way they did when she was trying to figure out a puzzle, and then horrified when Ms. Patel announced, "Your Honor, we'd like to call Leo Reed to the stand." I watched the color drain from Harper's face like someone had pulled a plug, and she grabbed Theo's arm so hard I saw him wince. Judith gasped audibly, clutching those fake pearls like they were going to save her, and Olivia's mouth literally fell open, which would have been funny under different circumstances. Mr. Haynes shot to his feet like someone had launched him from a catapult. "Your Honor, objection. The child is only 8 years old. This is highly irregular and potentially traumatic." "Mr. Haynes," Judge Everly interrupted, his voice carrying that tone of someone who'd heard every objection in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Children have the right to be heard in custody proceedings. I've reviewed the request, and I'm allowing it. The court will take appropriate measures to ensure the child's comfort." He looked down at Leo, and his expression softened in a way I hadn't seen during the entire proceeding. "Young man, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Do you understand that?" Leo nodded, then remembered courtroom protocol and said, "Yes, sir," in a voice that was small but steady. God, I was so proud of him and so terrified for him at the same time that I thought my chest might actually explode from the conflicting emotions. This was my kid. The same kid who still slept with a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, who cried during sad parts of movies even when he tried to hide it, who made me check under his bed for monsters even though he claimed he was too old for that stuff. And he was about to face down a courtroom full of adults who had agendas and lawyers and decades of experience manipulating situations to their advantage. The bailiff, a middle-aged guy named Rodriguez who I'd seen smile at Leo earlier when we'd entered the courtroom, helped him up to the stand with unexpected gentleness. He adjusted the microphone down to Leo's height and whispered something that made Leo's shoulders relax just a fraction. Then Rodriguez stepped back, and suddenly my 8-year-old son was sitting in that big leather chair that made him look even smaller than he was, his feet dangling a solid 6 inches off the ground, because whoever designed witness stands apparently never considered that children might need to use them. Judge Everly leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand in a way that made him look less like a stern authority figure and more like someone's grandfather trying to have a conversation. "Hello, Leo. Is it okay if I call you Leo?" "Yes, sir," Leo said again, his voice coming through the microphone clearer than I expected. He was wearing the suit we'd bought at Target, the one that was still slightly too big despite my attempts to roll up the sleeves, and his Spider-Man socks peeked out from under his dress pants. That detail, those ridiculous socks that he'd insisted on wearing because they made him feel brave, made my eyes burn with unshed tears that I absolutely could not let fall. Not here, not now. "Are you nervous, Leo?" Judge Everly asked, his voice gentler than I'd heard it all day, like he'd suddenly remembered that not everyone in his courtroom was a jaded adult who'd lost faith in the justice system somewhere around their third divorce. Leo thought about this for a second, his face serious in that way kids get when they're considering whether to tell the truth or say what they think adults want to hear. "A little," he finally admitted. "But Mom says being nervous means you care, so I guess that's okay." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Genuine laughter, not the polite courtesy chuckles that happened during boring testimony. Even the court reporter smiled, her fingers pausing on her weird little keyboard machine for just a second. I saw one of the people sitting in the gallery, some law student or intern who was probably here to observe proceedings, actually wipe her eyes. Harper's expression shifted from horror to something softer, something that looked almost like pride mixed with dread, because she recognized her own words coming back through our son's mouth. Judge Everly smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's very wise. Your mom's right about that. Now, Leo, I just want to ask you a few questions about your life with your dad. There's no right or wrong answers here, okay? I just want to hear about your experiences. Can you tell me what it's like living with your dad?" Leo sat up straighter, like he was preparing to give a book report in front of his class. "Dad helps me with homework every night, even when he's tired from work. He's really good at math, way better than me, and he makes it make sense, you know? Like, he uses examples with video games or baseball to explain stuff." He paused, then added, "He also makes pancakes on Sunday mornings, but they're kind of terrible. Like, really terrible. Sometimes they catch on fire." More laughter, louder this time. Even Judge Everly chuckled, and I felt my face heat up because, yeah, my pancake-making skills were objectively terrible, but in my defense, cooking has never been my strong suit, and at least I was trying. Leo continued, gaining confidence now that people were laughing with him instead of at him. "But he always says sorry when he burns them, and we order pizza instead, and that's okay because he tried. And he tells me to always be kind and never lie, even if people are mean to you, because being honest is more important than being liked." The laughter died down, replaced by something heavier, more attentive. The whole courtroom seemed to lean forward slightly, everyone suddenly invested in what this 8-year-old had to say. I could see Judith shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her hand moving to that ridiculous handkerchief she'd been using as a prop earlier. Olivia was staring at her phone, probably trying to pretend she wasn't hearing this, and Mr. Haynes was scribbling notes so furiously I thought he might tear through the paper. Judge Everly nodded slowly. "That sounds like good advice. Does your dad spend a lot of time with you and your sister?" "Yeah," Leo said, nodding enthusiastically. "He comes to all my baseball games, even the away ones that are like an hour drive. And he helps Ivy with her art projects, even though he's really bad at art. No offense, Dad." He looked directly at me when he said that, and I had to press my lips together to keep from laughing despite the tension because the kid wasn't wrong. I drew stick figures that looked like they'd been in terrible accidents. "None taken." I mouthed back and saw his shoulders relax a little more. Judge Everly's expression remained gentle, but I could see something shifting in his eyes, some calculation happening behind that judicial mask. "Leo, has anyone talked to you about what to say in court today?" And there it was. The moment everything changed. I watched Leo's face transform from relaxed to serious, his jaw setting in that stubborn way that meant he'd made a decision and wasn't backing down. The courtroom went completely silent, the kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning rattling and someone's stomach growling 3 rows back, and the court reporter's fingers hovering over her machine, waiting for whatever was about to be said. "Dad told me never to say this," Leo began, and Harper actually made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a whimper, that carried in the silent room. "But you need to hear it." Judge Everly took off his glasses slowly, like he needed to see this moment more clearly, and I swear to God I watched his eyes get shiny. The man who'd looked like he hadn't felt emotion since the Reagan administration who'd sat through hours of testimony with the expression of someone watching paint dry, suddenly looked like he was fighting back tears. "Mom called me last week," Leo continued, his voice steady but his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "She said if I told people that Dad was mean to us, or that he yelled a lot, or that I didn't like living with him, then I could live with her and Theo in the big house all the time. She said the house has a pool and a game room, and I could have my own bathroom, and we could get a dog." The courtroom erupted. Not loudly. Family court doesn't allow for Jerry Springer-style chaos. But there was a collective inhale of breath, a rustling of bodies shifting, a murmur of voices that Judge Everly had to gavel down. Harper was crying now, actual tears streaming down her face, and Theo looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else on planet Earth, possibly including the surface of the sun. But Leo wasn't done. And Aunt Olivia texted me. "I'm not supposed to have a phone, but Mom gave me one, and said if I told the judge that I was scared of Dad, or that he didn't take care of us, she'd buy me the new gaming laptop I wanted. The really expensive one." Olivia stood up like she was going to object, or flee, or possibly combust on the spot, but Judge Everly pointed at her with his gavel. "Sit down." 2 words, delivered with such absolute authority that she dropped back into her seat like her legs had given out. Leo's voice got quieter then, but somehow more powerful. "But Dad says love isn't about gifts or big houses or stuff. He says love is about showing up. And he always shows up. He shows up when I'm sick, and when I have bad dreams, and when I need help with homework even though he's tired. He shows up to my games, even when his team at work needs him. He just shows up." That's when I saw it. A single tear rolling down Judge Everly's cheek before he quickly wiped it away. The court reporter was openly crying. The bailiff Rodriguez was blinking rapidly and looking at the ceiling. Even Mr. Haynes looked shaken, his pen frozen mid-note. Leo looked right at me then and smiled. This small, brave smile that said he'd done what he came to do. That's all I wanted to say. Mic drop. Game over. My 8-year-old son had just destroyed their entire case with nothing but the truth. Judge Everly called for another recess after Leo's testimony, probably because he needed time to compose himself or possibly consult with whatever deity judges pray to when 8-year-olds deliver more truth than they've heard in their entire careers. The bailiff Rodriguez practically carried Leo down from the stand. Not literally, but with that protective energy that made it clear he'd decided Leo was now under his personal guard, and Ms. Patel whisked us back to that depressing family room before anyone from Harper's side could approach us. I sat there with Leo on my lap, even though he was getting too big for it and his elbow was digging into my ribs, and I just held him while he trembled slightly with the adrenaline crash that comes after doing something incredibly brave and terrifying. Ivy, who'd been coloring in the corner with Mrs. Chen watching her, looked up and asked, "Did Leo do good?" With that pure, uncomplicated confidence that only 5-year-olds possess. "He did amazing, Butterfly," I said, my voice rough because I was about 3 seconds away from completely losing it emotionally, and I couldn't do that. Not yet. Not until this was over. He was the bravest person in that whole room. Leo looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. "Did I do the right thing, Dad?" Mom looked really sad. And Jesus, that question, the fact that my kid was worried about his mother's feelings even after revealing that she tried to manipulate him into lying, that just about killed me. "You did exactly the right thing, buddy. You told the truth. That's always right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Ms. Patel was pacing the small room, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor, and she had this look on her face like she'd just won the lottery, but was trying not to celebrate until the check cleared. "Mason, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I have never seen anything like that. That kid of yours just gave the most powerful testimony I've ever witnessed." "He shouldn't have had to," I said, because even though I was proud, I was also furious at the situation that had forced my 8-year-old to be the adult in the room. None of this should have happened. "You're right," she agreed, sitting down across from me and leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "But it did happen, and Leo handled it like a champ. Now we wait for Judge Everly's ruling." The wait felt like approximately 17 years, even though it was probably only 45 minutes. I tried to distract the kids by playing some stupid game on my phone with them, but my mind kept replaying Leo's testimony, Harper's face when he'd revealed her attempted manipulation, Olivia's absolute horror when he'd mentioned the bribe, and Judge Everly's unexpected tears. The man had wiped his eyes. An actual judge, in an actual courtroom, had gotten emotional because my son had reminded him what integrity looked like. When we finally filed back into the courtroom, the atmosphere had completely changed. It felt heavier somehow, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Harper looked like she'd aged approximately 10 years in the last hour. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her makeup was smeared despite obvious attempts to fix it, and she sat hunched in her chair like someone had removed her spine and replaced it with regret. Theo was beside her, but there was visible space between them now, like he'd scooted his chair away a few inches and was trying to pretend he'd never met her. Classic move from a guy who'd probably been promised that this whole custody thing would be easy, that they'd steamroll the boring ex-husband and move on with their lives, and instead had just witnessed his girlfriend get exposed for trying to coach her kid into lying under oath. Judith sat ramrod straight, her face frozen in this expression that was trying to be dignified but mostly just looked constipated. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, just stared straight ahead like if she didn't acknowledge what had happened, maybe it would cease to exist. Olivia, on the other hand, looked like she was calculating how quickly she could delete her social media accounts and possibly move to another country where nobody had heard about this disaster. Her phone was clutched in her hand, probably already composing some damage control post about misunderstandings and taken out of context that would fool exactly nobody. Mr. Haynes stood for his closing arguments, and I've never seen a lawyer look less enthusiastic about his job. He stood there in his expensive suit with his fancy cufflinks, and he stuttered through his prepared speech like a man who was being paid in regret and possibly blood money. Your Honor, despite the testimony we've heard today, my client maintains that she acted in what she believed to be. He trailed off, looking down at his notes like they might contain an escape route, then seemed to give up entirely. My client requests shared custody with the understanding that both parents love their children and want what's best for them. It was the legal equivalent of throwing in the towel while pretending you were still fighting. Judge Everly looked at him with an expression that could only be described as profoundly unimpressed. The kind of look teachers give students who clearly didn't do the reading and are trying to bullshit their way through a book report. Ms. Patel's closing argument, by contrast, was sharp and concise. Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Reed has consistently demonstrated that he prioritizes his children's well-being above all else, including his own comfort. He has raised a son who understands the value of honesty, even when that honesty is painful. We request primary custody with the understanding that we hope Mrs. Reed will work on rebuilding trust with her children through appropriate therapeutic channels. Judge Everly sat back in his chair, removing his glasses and cleaning them slowly. A gesture that I'd learned over the course of this hearing meant he was thinking carefully about something. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing, hear the air conditioning rattle, hear someone's watch ticking 3 rows back. Even Ivy was silent, sensing somehow that this moment mattered even if she didn't understand why. Finally, Judge Everly put his glasses back on and looked down at the papers in front of him. When he spoke, his voice was clear and firm, carrying that weight of authority that comes from 30 years on the bench making decisions that alter the course of people's lives. I've presided over custody cases for 3 decades, he began, and my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribcage and make a run for it. I've heard every argument, every accusation, every strategy that lawyers can devise. But today, I heard something I don't hear nearly often enough in this courtroom. Unvarnished truth from a child brave enough to speak it. He paused, looking directly at Leo, who was sitting next to Ms. Patel with that same serious expression. Young man, thank you for your honesty. That took more courage than most adults could muster. Leo nodded, and I saw his hand grip the edge of his chair a little tighter. Judge Everly's expression hardened as he turned his attention to Harper. Mrs. Reed, what you attempted to do, coaching your child to lie in court proceedings, offering bribes in exchange for false testimony, is not only morally reprehensible, it's potentially criminal. I am frankly shocked that someone would attempt to manipulate their own children in such a manner. Harper was crying openly now, not the delicate tears of earlier, but full-on sobbing, her shoulders shaking. Theo was staring at his shoes like they were the most fascinating objects in the universe. Therefore, Judge Everly continued, his voice taking on that official tone that meant the ruling was coming and it was final. The court rules as follows. Mr. Mason Reed will have primary physical custody of the minor children Leo Reed and Ivy Reed. Mrs. Harper Reed will have supervised visitation rights, conditional upon completion of co-parenting counseling and individual therapy to address the concerning behavior demonstrated in these proceedings. My brain sort of short-circuited at that point. Primary custody. I had primary custody. My kids would live with me, in our house, with the backyard where we played catch and the kitchen where I burned pancakes, and the living room where we had movie nights. They'd be home. Furthermore, Judge Everly said, and his voice got even more stern if that was possible, any future attempt to manipulate these children, to coach them toward false testimony, or to use them as pawns in parental disputes will result in immediate suspension of visitation rights pending a full review. Is that understood, Mrs. Reed? Harper could barely choke out a yes, Your Honor, through her tears. Then Judge Everly did something unexpected. He looked directly at me, and his expression softened. Mr. Reed, you've clearly raised a son with integrity. In a system where I regularly see parents coaching their children toward lies that serve adult agendas, it's refreshing. No, it's remarkable to see a child who understands that honesty matters, even when it's difficult. The court thanks Leo for reminding us what truth sounds like. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral and professional when what I really wanted to do was jump up and down like I just won the Super Bowl. Thank you, Your Honor. I managed, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Ms. Patel squeezed my arm, and I could feel her vibrating with barely contained victory energy. This court is adjourned, Judge Everly said, banging his gavel once. And just like that, it was over. The courtroom erupted in that controlled chaos that happens when big decisions get made. People standing, gathering papers, conversation starting. I turned to look at Harper one more time, and she was just sitting there frozen, like someone had hit pause on her entire existence. Her lawyer was packing up his briefcase with the speed of someone who wanted to be anywhere else. Theo was already halfway to the door, apparently having decided that loyalty only went so far when your girlfriend got publicly destroyed in family court. Judith pushed past people to get to Harper, her face a mask of fury and shame, and Olivia was right behind her, phone already out and probably typing some crisis management post. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered every lie they'd told, every character assassination they'd attempted, every time they'd called me a gold digger who didn't care about his kids, and that sympathy evaporated like water on hot pavement. Ms. Patel was shaking my hand, grinning like she'd just won the case of her career, which, honestly, she kind of had. Mason, congratulations. Your kids are going home with you tonight. Home. My kids were coming home. For good. I looked down at Leo, who was watching me with those serious eyes, waiting to see how I'd react. And I did the only thing that made sense. I picked him up, even though he was really too big for it now, and hugged him so hard he squeaked. You did good, kid. I whispered into his hair. You did so good. I know, he said, and I felt him smile against my shoulder. I told the truth. That's what you taught me. Yeah, that's what I taught him. And apparently, it actually worked. The weeks after Judge Everly's ruling felt like living in some alternate dimension where things actually worked out the way they were supposed to, which honestly was disorienting as hell after months of everything going sideways. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some new legal filing to show up at my door, for Judith to emerge from whatever rock she'd crawled under and try round 2 of Let's Destroy Mason. But it never came. Turns out getting publicly eviscerated in family court by your own 8-year-old grandson has a way of shutting people up real quick. Harper disappeared from social media entirely, which was genuinely shocking considering her phone had basically been surgically attached to her hand for the past 2 years. Her Instagram went dark. No more carefully curated outfit photos. No more inspirational quotes about living your best life. No more humble brags about her business success. Her last post, from the day before the final hearing, was still up. A picture of a latte with some caption about choosing joy that aged like milk left out in the Arizona sun. The comments section had turned into a dumpster fire of speculation after word got out about what happened in court. Apparently someone who'd been in the gallery had loose lips, and instead of managing it, Harper just vanished. For someone whose entire identity had been wrapped up in her online presence, that silence spoke volumes. Olivia, because she's incapable of not being the center of attention even when her best move would be shutting the hell up, tried a different approach. She started posting these cryptic quotes on her Instagram that were clearly about the situation but vague enough that she could claim plausible deniability if anyone called her out. My personal favorite was "Truth always surfaces, even when buried beneath lies." Yeah, thanks for that wisdom, Socrates. Really insightful coming from the woman who'd literally tried to bribe a child with a gaming laptop. Dave sent me screenshots of all of them with commentary like, "Is she serious right now?" And the audacity of this woman could power a small city. But honestly, I stopped paying attention to their drama pretty quickly because I was too busy watching my kids become themselves again. Leo went back to being a kid, just a regular 8-year-old who cared about baseball stats and whether his Pokemon cards were worth anything, instead of carrying the weight of his parents' dysfunction on his shoulders. The anxiety that had been etched into his face for months started fading, replaced by more smiles, more bad jokes. He was definitely inheriting my sense of humor, poor kid, more of that lightness that kids are supposed to have. He started sleeping through the night again without the nightmares that had been plaguing him. He stopped asking me worried questions about whether I was okay, whether we had enough money, whether he'd done the right thing by telling the truth. He just got to be a kid again. Ivy, bless her oblivious heart, seemed to register that something had shifted in the universe but couldn't quite articulate what. What she could do was draw, and suddenly our refrigerator became an art gallery of family portraits. There was one of all four of us, me, Leo, Ivy, and even Harper, holding hands in front of a house with a son that had a smiley face and approximately 17 cats scattered around, because apparently every picture Ivy drew needed cats. She labeled me best pancake maker in her wobbly 5-year-old handwriting, which was objectively false given my pancake skills, but I framed that picture anyway. It's hanging in my office now, right where I can see it when I'm having a bad day and need to remember what actually matters. The biggest surprise came about 6 weeks after the ruling when Harper actually started showing up, and I don't mean physically showing up, because she'd been doing the supervised visitation thing as ordered by the court. I mean really showing up as a parent, as herself, not as the Instagram influencer version of a mom who curated moments for content. After therapy, both individual and the co-parenting counseling the judge mandated, something shifted. She stopped trying to be the fun parent who bought affection with expensive gifts and started being just a mom. An imperfect, trying to figure it out mom who sometimes messed up but was at least genuine about it. It wasn't easy. There were awkward conversations and tense moments and times when old patterns tried to resurface. But it was honest. And for once, that was enough. It's been a year since that day in courtroom 4B, and honestly, life is weirdly normal now. The good kind of normal, not the Pinterest perfect facade hiding a dumpster fire kind that we had before. I still make terrible pancakes every Sunday morning, and Leo still insists on helping, which somehow makes them even worse because apparently neither of us inherited any cooking genes whatsoever. Last week we managed to create pancakes that were simultaneously burnt on the outside and raw in the middle, which I'm pretty sure violates several laws of physics. Ivy sings off-key Disney songs at the top of her lungs while we cook, and the house perpetually smells like burnt batter and something I can only describe as peaceful chaos. Our smoke alarm has become more of a cooking timer at this point. When it goes off, we know breakfast is ready. The kids are doing great. Leo made the all-star team for baseball this year, and I've only missed 2 games, both because of work emergencies that actually were emergencies, not the fake kind people use as excuses. He's got this confidence now that wasn't there before, like he knows he can handle hard things because he's already handled the hardest thing an 8-year-old, 9-year-old now, should ever have to face. Ivy's in kindergarten and has informed me that she's going to be an artist who also runs a cat shelter, which seems like a solid business plan, and I'm fully supportive. Harper and I have figured out co-parenting in a way that doesn't make me want to drive off a cliff. We're never going to be friends, but we can be civil, even friendly sometimes, for the kids. She's got them every other weekend and one night during the week, and she actually shows up on time now. The therapy helped, I'll give her that. She's not the person I married anymore. But she's not the person who tried to manipulate our son into lying either. She's somewhere in between, figuring it out, and that's more than I expected. Sometimes people ask me if I regret letting Leo speak in court, if I feel guilty about putting him in that position. Not a chance. That day, my kid didn't just save our family. He reminded everyone in that courtroom, including me, that truth doesn't need a lawyer or a strategy or a perfectly rehearsed speech. It just needs courage. Leo had more courage in his 8-year-old body than most adults accumulate in a lifetime. And I'm pretty sure I'll be telling that story at his wedding someday, probably embarrassing him in front of his future spouse. And if you're wondering about Judge Everly, yeah, he actually sends a Christmas card every year. This year's said, "To Leo, the bravest person who's ever stood in my courtroom. Keep telling the truth." It's stuck on our fridge next to Ivy's cat drawings and a coupon for pizza that expired 3 months ago. As for me, I learned 2 things through this whole disaster. Never underestimate a kid with a conscience and a backbone. And never, ever let your ex-wife's sister near a microphone, a witness stand, or any platform where she can spew her manifesting abundance bullshit. Life isn't perfect. My pancakes still suck, my car still makes that weird noise I keep meaning to get checked, and I'm pretty sure I found a Lego in the couch cushions that's been there since 2019. But my kids are home, they're happy, and they know their dad showed up. That's the only thing that matters.